Good evening. My name is Charlie Coker. I'm the Executive Director of Asia Society Southern California. Welcome to our program this evening, HBO Max, Championing Representation in the Industry. We'll hear a panel on a discussion on HBO Max's community's first approach to developing marketing campaigns that reach underrepresented audiences. Our program this evening will be moderated by Katie Soo. Katie Soo is our very own co-chair of Asia Society Southern California, as well as an SPV of Growth Marketing at HBO Max. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Katie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to be here. I hope you enjoyed the video from earlier, which featured Warrior. And I know some of you may already have caught the news, but in case you haven't, we're very excited to let you know that Warrior Season 3 was renewed and is coming to HBO Max, which we're all very, very excited about. So let's dive in. I want to give everyone on the panel a chance to introduce themselves, and we're very excited to talk to you about this topic. So I'll kick it off with Billy.
Hi, I'm Billy Wee. I'm a Senior Vice President of Comedy and Animation for HBO Max with a special focus on adult animation. I started my career as a producer working for Steven Spielberg's Amblin Television and then for Adam Sandler's Happy Madison Productions. And I came to the buying and programming side of the business about 5 years ago at TBS and joined up with HBO Max in the spring of 2019 when we were just getting started. I helped bring the Studio Ghibli collection to HBO Max, and I'm thrilled to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of our launch next month. My favorite thing about comedy is the people. You get to work with some genuine lunatics, and really you come to depend on some of these lunatics to deliver a great show for you, which is absurd and stressful, but when it's fun, it's so much fun. And I know my colleague Jeniffer Kim knows all about that as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeniffer Kim. I'm Senior Vice President of International Programming for HBO Max. And I originally come from the TBS side as well, worked with Billy and did comedy development for many, many years. And now have the pleasure of broadening my horizons and doing more global programming and focusing on international stories that are coming from all over the world, and really getting to tap into a new arena that I had never had a chance to. And so it's been very, very exciting. I'm also a co-founder of a new organization called CAL, which is Korean American Leaders in Hollywood. And so it's been a really great kind of gratifying experience to be a part of the Asian kind of forward organization in light of like everything that's been going on. So thank you. I'll kick it over to Andrea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Chen, and I lead campaign planning and management on the HBO Max Growth Marketing team. I was previously always in theatrical marketing, working on the international side of the business. So have a lot of experience really bringing that like localized strategy that I've always applied to my international marketing now to a communities focused strategy over in the US. And then I'll kick it over to Pia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pia Chausen Barlow. I'm a Chinese Filipino first generation immigrant. Well, technically I'm a 1.5 gen. My sun sign is Aries and my rising is Taurus. And I oversee the marketing for HBO Max Originals. Before coming to HBO Max about a year ago, I was at Netflix for on and off for about 5 years. I did do a stint at Fox on the theatrical side, but started my career at HBO for about a decade. First off, I'm super grateful and very excited to be on this panel with Katie and Billy and Jen and Andrea to discuss such a deeply important part of what I get to do here at HBO Max, and super honored and feel an immense amount of pride and privilege to get to do the work that we're doing, mostly because I think stories like the ones we tell at Max change hearts and minds. And so I just feel like we have such a great opportunity and a responsibility to shape culture and help make it better, and give people some meaning and feel more connected and less alone. You know, on the one hand, it's super heart-wrenching that it's 2021 and we're still experiencing the violence and silencing of our people, as well as our BIPOC and LGBTQ plus and trans brothers and sisters. But I'm also really encouraged because of the public groundswell that's, rising up and saying, no, no more. And I mean, look at us here today having this conversation. So it's pretty amazing. And so hi again, and thank you.
Thank you. And, as many of you can hear, there's so much passion in every single person's background, what they do. Obviously, HBO Max is a part of our story today, but many of them have been leaders in this space for a very long time. And so I'm extremely honored and privileged to be able to share their stories with you. And so to kick it all off, I just want to start with a poll. If we can get that set up and just shared, and just a quick response. The question is, do you feel AAPI representation is moving in the right direction? And this is a really important question to sort of lay the foundation down, because as we dive into this topic, I just wanted to get a sense of where everyone was at and how they felt about that question today. So while we're setting that up and the poll goes out, I just want to dive into the first question. Obviously, with HBO Max, we really want to focus on content that tells stories from diverse audiences. This is obviously a core piece of what we do day to day. So how do you work to develop content with representation in mind? And I'll kick it back to Billy to start.
Thanks, Katie. And, just to echo something that Pia was saying, it is such an immense privilege to get to do this and to get to work with storytellers to try and tell the strongest, most impactful, most resonant version of the show or movie or story or character that they have in mind. And the thing that we devote so much time and attention to, the thing that really keeps me up at night, is that we live in a world of 1,000 shows, and how can you make something that's going to stand out, that's going to speak to audiences in a new way, that's going to find audiences and pull people together. There's nothing more exciting than when I talk to someone who's so excited to recommend a new show or something that they've watched, or talk about something that they've watched. And we're always striving to try and create those things, try and find things that that feel like they can have that kind of power. And it starts with the storyteller themselves, and finding people who feel like not only do they have a unique story to tell, but a real voice, and then figuring out how you build a team around them and how you support them. And in a world where so many shows, so many films are getting made, people get their first crack at being a creator younger and younger, or earlier in their career than they would have, let's say, 10 or 15 years prior. So it really is incumbent on us as development executives to work with those people and to really be ready to roll up our sleeves and help them do, the somewhat impossible job, which is writing and then producing their own show, whether it's live action or animation, or if you're talking about documentarians. But I know my colleagues would agree. I really feel like from the moment that a pitch comes in or an artist comes in that you want to work with, until the moment that it's actually up on the platform and people are watching it, there are so many steps along the way, and so many people that that touch that process and impact that process. And it's very meaningful to me to get to do that with the people you see in front of you on this panel today. I feel like we've got a great group at Max that really understands representation in storytelling and how important that is and how critical it is. Not just that the creator be someone who's telling their own story, but that as you're casting it, as you're marketing it, as you're looking at all of the different things that go into making a show a success these days, that you really are telling an authentic story and starting with the most important thing, which is the voice of that storyteller.
That's great. So why don't we dive further into that and take an international bent to that view? On a global scale, how do you approach development strategy, and how do you work with international content providers on just general co-productions? And I'm going to throw this one to Jennifer, because this is your world.
Yeah, thank you. I think for where I sit and really kind of looking at international programming in the lens of like how will that also translate back into the US, right? Because we are, a domestic facing service right now, and we have obviously a global rollout plan, but really looking at like what is the best use of our space here, and looking at stories that we are not used to seeing, right? International stories that really speak to different cultures, because I believe that even though, you know, it comes from a different country, has a different language, different cultural, you know, kind of landscape around it, it still feels like there's a story to tell and a story to share, and that people are wanting to watch stories like that come from different places. So I think inclusion very much kind of taps into that global perspective and the stories that are coming from the outside back into the US and vice versa. And so I think that's really important for where I sit. And when I always kind of look at the slate coming in or different projects coming in with the eye of, you know, how is this going to tap into an audience? You know, what are the themes? You know, how is it dipping into kind of like the cultural conversation, and really trying to look at it from kind of the larger macro sense. You know, obviously there is different kind of mandates with international programming versus a domestic programming, but really I think at the core of it is like you're just trying to find really inclusive stories to tell ultimately at the end of the day. And so I think that's, you know, the thing that gets me so excited, because historically I've done, you know, domestic comedies for like a greater part of my career at TBS, and that was always my goal there, is like, how do I instill diversity and be inclusive in these types of, you know, half-hour comedies, and whether it's staffing or like, you know, how you staff your crew, all of that was always in my mind, and it's something that I'm deeply passionate about. But, you know, translating that to a new whole world, it makes me excited, because now you just have your playground suddenly it's more expansive and bigger, and you're just tapping into such a different audience. But at the core of it, storytelling is storytelling. I truly believe that. And so I think that if you're tapping into, you know, creators who have a vision, who have something to say, and really kind of want to be open and share that perspective, I think that's kind of the lens in which I look at everything and assess like what makes sense to tell for HBO Max to, you know, in the landscape of international, but also servicing our audience here.
That's great. And I think so much of that is what you said about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. And I think we can't not talk about the storytellers and the creators themselves. So maybe talk to me and talk to the audiences who are tuning in about the types of creators we work with, and how do we work with them to champion representation?
I think you can do it in several ways. I mean, there's an animated series that we're working on right now with Eddie Huang called Chinos that I find just a really interesting and loud and ambitious but heartfelt story that I know means a lot to Eddie. And I think we have some art that we can show you of just the range of characters that he wants to feature and work into this show. And at the heart of the story is a very interesting relationship between you know, a son and his parents, but he also wants to illuminate kind of the breadth of coming of age experiences in different Asian communities in Los Angeles, you know, from Calabasas to Boyle Heights and all around. And he kind of pitched it in loose terms as almost an Asian Boondocks, or wanting to accomplish for audiences, you know, what the Boondocks did when it first landed, which was, you know, I think it was a hugely impactful, but also in some ways kind of revolutionary comedy. And so, you know, certainly across all areas at HBO Max, we're looking for creators who have a level of ambition, but also whose stories I think are authentic and feel like stories that only they can tell, or that they have an approach to the story that maybe you haven't seen before. And I think representation can also be important just in terms of how you make casting decisions, like, you know, on Insecure, when you think of Alexander Hodge, who was Yvonne Orji's love interest in this last season, he really blew up. And same with Jin Ha in Love Life, he was fantastic. And you know, it's been really delightful to see actors like them get a shot at roles like that, and to get to step into shows as the love interest, the leading man, the guy who has to hold his own against Yvonne Orji, who is a force of nature and Insecure. I think you challenge creators to tell the most authentic version of their story, and to really get to the heart of what their show is about, and make sure that their ambitions are set high enough. But that you can be challenging other creators to make their shows more inclusive and more open-minded as well. And I think, you know, Insecure and Love Life both had tremendous success doing that in this past year.
Yeah, I was actually really blown away by the characters in Love Life when it first came out. I know Pia worked on that. And that's actually a really great way to transition to talk about the marketing. So a big part of storytelling for us is not just the stories that we make, but also how we market it. And so from an original programming perspective, how has just our program marketing's approach shaped the way that we promote representation within all of the campaigns we run?
I'm I mean, I feel super lucky as a marketer because the programming strategy that Jen and Billy and the Max team cultivate is inherently so diverse and so inclusive. So it really makes my job pretty organic and not stilted in any way. You think about representation being the buzzword du jour these days. But it's not just about people seeing themselves on screen. It's really about normalizing these stories and characters. So, Billy, I think your example about Jin is a great example, right? Like in Love Life, when you showcase Anna Kendrick's character falling in love with a Korean American like love interest, it's huge when you think about rom-coms. And you don't see that often. Especially in the references I had growing up was 16 Candles and Long Duck Dong, right? And so for me, like it's inherent because it's just part of the storytelling. And not only did we highlight that love very organically, but we quickly saw on social that people called that very fact out, and how it was incredible to see Jen on screen next to Anna. Similarly for a show like Legendary, which if you haven't seen, you must see. It's focused on it's a ballroom dance competition show, and it's really focused on ballroom. Started, it was a Black and Latinx LGBTQ and trans community really built that up, but ballroom has had a big cultural sort of breakout. And one of the houses was the House of Ninja. That was an international group that had people from Japan, this big ball culture in Japan and in Taiwan, as well as Germany and Brazil. And so again, when you showcase them on screen, in the marketing, it's such a wonderful extension. And when you highlight these stories, people see themselves. And I think that's what we're seeing really resonate and speak back to us, particularly on social.
Yeah, and I've actually been really impressed with a lot of our program marketing. I think, so much of it actually does do justice to the stories and the characters and the cast that we bring. And so why don't we go into actually some of our broader campaign work where we actually have to do multi-show and bring to life our seasonal campaigns and ways that we take that community's first approach. So Andrea, this is definitely in your wheelhouse. This is what you do day to day. Like, tell us a little bit about how you bring that to life in what you do every day.
Yeah, so I would say, one of the huge benefits is because we own a lot of the end-to-end consumer journey across all the different touch points that we hit across growth. There's really so many natural ways that we can infuse it. That's both authentic as well as organic. Starts with the content of just having such an amazing library as well as new originals where we can really feature these characters. And then that's where we really look at our community's approach as an always on program. So it's not something that we look at as opportunistic where you're only featuring them at certain months throughout the year where they're highlighted. It's just infused in every single aspect of our marketing. And so the way that we approach it is really how can we look at ways that we can champion representation and then bring this content also in ways that we can elevate it to, whether it's through our email campaigns, our marketing partnerships, influencers, and then everything that we do with on-channel marketing, which our editorial team, they were the ones that really brought Warrior early onto us as an opportunity where they really felt like it could be a bigger thing. So they made huge efforts to continue elevating it on platform. We saw that represented in the performance data, and then we just brought it into every single other aspect of our campaigns too, and marketing touchpoints.
Yeah, and I actually think that one of the interesting things about what I've observed with HBO Max in general is that because we help tell the story across all of the different experiences with the customer, we're actually seeing representation shape just the way that people experience not just our product, but our content and our marketing in general. And I think this is obviously the right group to talk about that. But let's actually take a personal just path for 1 second. Because of what each of you have done, which has been so incredible. I mean, we've gone from program marketing, we've talked about international development, we've talked about development in general and marketing. Who did you look up to while you were growing up? And how did that shape your worldview? Did it impact the way that you approach your work today? Did it change the way that you want to bring representation forward? And this is for everyone, so just jump in.
Yeah, I will say, there's a guy I've still never met named Richard Sakai, who was James Brooks's producing partner forever, I think still is. And I remember seeing his name in the credits for The Simpsons and being just fascinated, wanting to learn more about him, wanting to understand his path to how he got to where he was. But also, it came at a time in my life when I was just really understanding what the storytelling business is, or what television and the entertainment businesses, and the idea that, there are real jobs that you can go work in doing if you're not a writer or an actor or a director. And Richard Sakai, was one of those people who, produced some incredible movies, maybe the greatest animated show of all time in The Simpsons, and has had an illustrious career, but was somebody who, because he did it, made me believe there was a place for people like me in this business, which was no small thing. When you're trying to figure out if you have the courage to make that leap, how do you make that jump into this business? It can be a difficult thing, but I was grateful to know that it was possible because of Richard and people like him.
I would say for me, so many people shaped kind of my upbringing, as I like to say, but not just necessarily people in the business. But I think, when it comes to entertainment, I actually struggle to find, someone to really look up to, because it wasn't there for me. I think that was something where, whether it's, in television or movies, like, it was a struggle for me to find representation in my space. And so, I looked at people that were just kind of around me, like, somebody like an upperclassman in high school, like people who are very local that really affected me in that way. And I wish I had grown up with someone who really could give me that inspiration. And so that's why I think part of me kind of getting into entertainment was also like, well, I'm not seeing that, so let me just kind of pave that way for myself. And I'm not saying it's not that I was like looking to myself to be that inspiration, but it really was like, I just found it very limiting for me. And so it was very frustrating. And even the shows that I watched, I never saw, myself represented. So I never understood what that meant. So I found myself watching shows that had zero representation, but I loved it because to me, it was like, oh, I would never be in that conversation anyway. So let me just enjoy the show. So I loved shows growing up, but I think now being in this situation where I'm like, wait a minute, if I can't find someone to look up to, like, let me just try to get into this business and see what it's all about and start creating stories that I can look to, and that hopefully the next generation doesn't have it so bleak as I did, and I don't say that to be negative, because I just feel like in my space, and I grew up in the Bay Area, entertainment was so far away from me, and like, just, it wasn't around me, and I wish I had that. So I think for me, part of the reason why, getting into the business in the first place was to say like, hey, well, if I'm seeing this and I'm seeing a lack of representation, like, maybe then I can get into it and kind of help create the representation that is needed. So I think for me, like, I wish I had that, but it gave me the motivation and kind of, the desire and passion to try.
Yeah, I would echo that, Jennifer. I feel the same way. I don't know, if I'm thinking about American TV, I don't know that I saw myself or had that moment where like, oh my gosh. But I will say that Connie Chung was a boss, and I thought like, I remember she was a household staple in our house. And I thought like, wow, we can be on TV in America. That was a really cool moment. But I'll say there was a dearth for quite some time. In that way. And so I looked mostly in international programming and in international directors. So like Wong Kar-wai, I'm just like, to me, like when I started, I looked to story like Hong Kong cinema and Korean film, where I really sort of felt a connection to my culture in that way. And really growing up, I watched lots of kung fu movies and action movies with my dad. And so that's where I saw representation. But in terms of American TV, I would say the same. And so that's why I am so excited when I see shows like Warrior and yay, season 3. I'm optimistic, and I'm so glad that there is, whatever groundswell or excitement there is right now in the industry to really start telling our stories. I'm going to latch onto it. Even if it's opportunistic right now, come our way, please.
I love that. I agree, Pia. Like that's so true. And yes, I did love programming outside the country for sure. But you're right. It's like, I'm so excited. And just to say, like, that was my, just looking at our slate and just what Billy's doing on comedy and what the drama team's doing and just everybody holistically, it's very, very exciting. And I'm excited for the tide to change.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jennifer, too, that like a lot of the representation, not only like across media, but then in the workplace too, has been few and far between. So, I mean, I'm so honored to be a part of this panel with this group of just like amazing leadership who are bringing that lens into everything that we do. And then also setting an example. Like, I think for me, it's like hearing from some of our interns too, even that like this is the first time that they've been able to like look up and see executives who look like them, is something that like I also didn't really have a lot of as I was growing up in the industry. So I think it's just so important, because then that's always the lens that like we're viewing in terms of like the way that we work, the approach to content, the approach to marketing can be so much more thoughtful, but it is few and far between, as like Pia was saying. I was thinking about this question too earlier today. And like, for me, it's always been Michelle Yeoh was someone that I looked up to just growing up. I mean, she set the example and the bar of being like just such an amazing, like badass as a Bond girl, a fully realized character. But then how much longer did it take too before like we got to having a movie like Crazy Rich Asians, which she's also in, but having fully realized characters too in an all Asian cast.
Yeah, I think when we talk about fully realized characters, that's something that, I mean, as a fan of Warrior, and I feel like I have to say, with Warrior returning for season 3, it just represents so much more of that, right? Like, you're just seeing more representation on screen, you're seeing more representation in stories, but more importantly, you're also seeing a slice of history and that whole entire backdrop of a part of our story that has never really been told on screen. And I think, that's just the first step in many stories to come. And so let's go into that, like, as a part of everything that you do day to day, as you think about manifesting a lot of the representation we've just talked about, how does it come to life, in your role every day? Like, is it like, how do you champion it? What are some examples of stories or projects or, just casting decision, anything that has sort of helped you bridge this gap? I'll start with Pia.
Sure. I was going to throw it to Jennifer because she had a great story earlier, but maybe I'll do that after. I will say for me, we have a really exciting but really massive HBO Max slate. And so when we think about how do we, what content do we really spotlight, do we talk about in different meaningful ways? So for me, prioritizing content that features BIPOC or other unrepresented talent in front of and behind the camera is one filter or lens I think about it, right? We have even though we have a big juicy slate of DC shows and movies, I think about shows like House of Poe, or Warrior, or Legendary, that are major for us. And that's because that's the brand we represent and want to continue to represent, right? Another way I think about it is the agencies that we hire. We've committed to RFPing minority-owned agencies in all of our tentpole and priority campaigns, because again, like, different voices, diverse voices and points of view matter. As well as in the teams that we build and building those leaders up and elevating those voices. That may not be specific to the content marketing I do, but it's certainly in the choices that I make every day.
That's actually really great. And why don't we just, I mean, that's a really important thing to talk about in general is representation is not just in the storytelling and our marketing that we do, but also in the leadership as well as the teams that we build. And so, you know, similar to Andrea, I'm just so happy and thrilled and honored to be among all of you because each of you are shaping a very distinct part of our business. But as you grow your teams, you know, what are the active decisions you make to bring on a diverse team? How is that represented in your everyday hiring? And I'll kick this one off to Andrea to start.
Yeah, so I'd say like something that we truly believed into when we were building out this team is that we didn't necessarily hire for multicultural marketing experts, but we were really extremely cognizant of the team of building a diverse team. So we really wanted our team to like actually reflect the customers too that we're marketing to. And so with that too, it really is just like, as I was saying earlier, it's interwoven in all of our campaigns and then our approach too. And then also creating a safe space too, for people to feel like that they have a voice and that they can voice those different opinions. Like I think one of the biggest things about the Asian community too is like, we're not a monolith. There's a lot of different variation too in the stories that we're trying to tell. And it is that perspective, which is unique that you have to own and live, which across our entire team too, they bring that to the table in terms of the way that we've approached our hiring.
And then so Pia teased a story earlier, Jennifer. So I'm going to throw to you just about like, you know, representation, decisions you've had to make, ways that you've brought some of that representation to your every single day work.
Gosh, I truly don't know what story this was, Pia, but I will, what was it?
It was, you were just coming out of the meeting with Sarah and you were, yeah.
Yeah, I was just coming from another meeting about, you know, equity and inclusion and the conversation surrounded, you know, the making sure that we are looking at below the line, you know, yes, of course, casting, and yes, of course, above the line and the producers, and that's always important, but really also looking at how is the crew represented, right? You know, and how does, you know, how, yes, in turn, you know, the producers. So I think it was just, you know, nice to see that, you know, my group led by Sarah Aubrey really is passionate about having the conversation, not ignoring it and really facing it, you know, and making sure that we are, you know, addressing it and really, you know, this is the time to be addressing it. But just going back to just, you know, even where I sit, you know, it's incredibly important for me to hire diverse. I think that is something that's like the first thing I always think about. And I had the pleasure of building a team under International in the last year and a half, and, you know, really proud that my team is diverse and all female, and that, you know, alone, because I want to groom them and hopefully, you know, prop them up so that they can be leaders of, you know, tomorrow, and make sure that they, you know, whether a promotion is in conversation, you know, whether, you know, how you can kind of put them in and make them more visible. I think that's incredibly important to me because I had such great mentors and leaders, you know, growing up that always did the same for me. And I'm just, you know, indebted to them. So I would hope that I could be a leader just the same and really look at, you know, hiring people who look like the people that we're trying to service, which is what Pia always talks about in marketing too, is like, those are the people that are representing kind of our audience. So I'm incredibly proud of my team. And I have to say, just a shout out to our wonderful marketing ladies. Like, you know, I've worked in television for a decade and come across, you know, lots of marketing campaigns and everybody, you know, it's all been great, but I have to say just the special touch that, you know, Pia and Andrea put into, and the thoughtfulness behind the campaigns, and so specific to the experiences of the storytellers. I just have to say it's, you know, bar none. It's so great. And it really goes, you know, it means so much to me because it inspires, you know, what Billy and I do on a day-to-day basis is create and help, you know, create and foster environments to have storytellers feel safe and come here, and then to take their baby and to like put it into the world with the wonderful marketing. Like, that's so important. And I think, you know, I think people, at least for me growing up, I didn't understand that. And I truly do now, seeing such thoughtfulness go into these campaigns. It's like immensely important. And so thank you. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you for creating these stories, honestly.
You know, another level I think that's important about it too is supporting artists as they grow in their career and move into positions where they can go from being, let's say, a staff writer to a mid-level writer to running a show. And one example, you know, I'll brag for Jen because she didn't bring it up, but Jen worked with Christina Lee on Search Party, which was an incredible show and a great experience for her. And then to see Christina step into a bigger role, even on our new show Made for Love, was fantastic, but she wouldn't have been prepared for it had she not spent all those years working, you know, with Jen and the rest of the team on the first couple seasons of Search Party. And that's something that we think a lot about too, is how do you, even if you're talking about younger talent or talent that are just getting started, maybe just directing their first episode or something like that, how do you think of it as a long relationship wherein you're going to support their growth, try and provide the right opportunities for them, and hopefully, you know, help develop their careers to the point where when they have their own show to pitch, when they have their own story to tell, where else would they want to do it but here with us at HBO Max?
Well, Billy, let's go a little bit further on that too. So in the case of when you're trying to make sure that we're developing shows, you know, featuring AAPI talent above the line and below the line, how do you go about that? Like, how does that manifest itself in your process?
Well, I think the first step is you know, we take very seriously the idea of trying to be the very best home for talent in the world and the place where artists feel like they can tell the best version of their story, the most impactful version of their story with us, whatever that story is. I think to go beyond that, the next step and something that's critical for all of us is really trying to find things that we feel like are going to stand out, are going to be new. And that's where looking for diverse creators with authentic stories to tell is a real advantage, frankly, and leaning into, you know, types of stories that maybe you feel like people haven't been open to or haven't been looking for in the last couple of years. Those feel like holes in the marketplace. You know, to use an example from the animated landscape, I think for years, anime was considered sort of very niche and small. And I've been telling people for the last year or two, really, that any Western animated show, any adult animated show that you've bought or made in the last 5 years has been pretty heavily influenced by anime, whether you're aware of it or not, because that's what the artists and creators and directors, that's what they're all watching. I mean, anime is very mainstream among Gen Z and millennials, much more so than I would say with Gen X or older viewers too. But leaning into that and looking at what we can do in the traditional animated space, how we can be, you know, developing and launching our own anime series, and you know, also in some cases thinking about what would a live action adaptation of a celebrated anime or something like that look like. I mean, to me, that's just one example of, if you aren't paying close attention, you might think that anime is niche, but there is a huge and young audience there ready if you are paying attention and ready to take them seriously. So I hope that's not a vague or elliptical answer, but I think that it starts with trying to think about, well, how can you be the very best home for creators of all stripes, creators from anywhere in the world, and then really devote your focus to what are the points of view and the stories and the types of creators that we're just not hearing from, and how do you nurture those artists and support them?
Yeah, I think the nurturing part is really critical. That's across our business, our people, the culture, creators. I mean, so much of that just relates back to mentorship and sponsorship and being able to open that door and continue that mission. I think, Jennifer, you said it earlier, it was so beautiful of just like not seeing that representation and wanting to step into a role where you could bring some of that to life because you saw that as an opportunity. I think a lot of times this is really what we all experience, and to be able to bring it forward for HBO Max, I think is really important. So I do want to share the poll results. So the poll results, 86% of respondents said that they felt API representation is moving in the right direction, and 15% said no. And this is really encouraging to see and hear, because obviously the efforts of everyone on this panel, you know, this is something that we hope to continue, and hopefully one day we get that to 100%, because that is really what the core mission of what we want to do is. So we can't really, you know, talk about representation without actually taking a view into what has been happening around us recently. And so with the rise of violence and hate, obviously within our community, what are you hoping to see in entertainment and the world around us? I'll throw to Andrea first on this one.
I mean, for me, sorry, my dog is it's that time for him. But for me, it's like, I really just agree in terms of like the multifaceted characters, right? Like that's where we really want to see Asians being showcased too in a way that feels natural, organic, infused into the storylines in ways that like are also just not only singling them out, right? And then like to Pia's point earlier, just normalizes our communities and then brings that diversity and culture to like broader audiences. And then ways that we can continue to like just champion that. People want to just see good stories, period. So it doesn't matter what walks of life they're from.
Yeah, I echo that in terms of the normalization of stories. And Andrew, you said something earlier too about, API culture not being a monolith. And that's like that specificity around the different API experiences too. We're at HBO Max, we're just scratching the surface, but I had mentioned House of Ho earlier. That wasn't just about an Asian American Texan family. It was specific to the Vietnamese American family experience, right? And we also did a docu-series last year. It was called Ravi Patel's Pursuit of Happiness, right? The story was very specifically about Ravi and his family, and about how how Indian and American cultures pervades his values, right, his perspective, and then he goes around the world to other cultures to question his own assumptions, and so I think we just need more of that, because I think pretty soon we'll realize that it's what we're talking about is really the universal human experience, right? And how, we cry, we laugh, we feel the same way. And so I would love to see that, as well as love to see more creative executives like Jen and Billy in those green light positions, so we can tell and elevate more of those stories.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, Pia, and also feel like, the best artists working at the moment will rise to the moment, and I think have something really powerful to say about the time that we're living through right now, the time that we've been living through the last 5-10 years. Some mediums, a film or an animated series, are going to take longer to arrive, longer before they get in front of audiences than other things. But authentic representation is critical. And also, I think I'm very interested to see the groundswell of support and togetherness that I think a lot of us have felt over the last couple of months. I'm excited to see it grow into something even bigger, and holding out hope that this can be a year of great progress for all of us, even though it's been a difficult one. And also very grateful to the artists like director Bong, who himself had a huge year last year. And I think artists like him, who will continue to make very loud statements, whose art will continue to really resonate around the world. That I find tremendously inspiring. And I have to believe it's inspiring to the next generation of artists and filmmakers as well.
I'm just going to echo what all three of you said and agree with you. I think ultimately for me, it's, authentic representation is essential in our experience. We are a monolith, but we also have lived so long under this kind of misnomer of model minority. And I think that that's something, is a word that's tossed around more and more. And I think that's something that we have to like really face and try to address, that, there is this kind of myth behind who, AAPI and the community of AAPI kind of has grown up to be or to look like. And I think that our experiences are so vast, and there's such a different kind of story for everyone. And I would love to just start seeing different types of stories in the Asian community as well, that it's not just, one experience times 10. It really is going to speak to so many different experiences, but also really want to just start to see more representation in all stories. I mean, going back to what Billy said about, having someone like Christina Lee, who's telling a story that isn't specific to an Asian American story. It's just a story, but it's a good story. So finding, opportunities to really elevate creators and storytellers to tell all types of stories, that they don't have to only tell Asian stories, I think is incredibly important as well.
Yeah, and actually on the topic of storytelling, I saw a couple of questions come through for Q&A. So I'll just start, throwing them and putting them into the panel. One of the questions I thought was really good, which is, Asian cultures are richly diverse. How can the industry promote, respect, and champion representation for this diversity without blurring the lines among various Asian and Asian American cultures? And I think many of you have addressed this in different ways, but as we think about the diaspora of Asians and Asian Americans, they're different. And so how would you think about that question, and what would you do?
I think it's a great question, and you're right. Part of what's fun about the storytelling business is finding very specific corners of it, specific characters who can illuminate, a culture, an experience, a type of family experience, a type of relationship. How to do it in such a way that it doesn't blur the lines among various cultures is a challenge, but I think it's the kind of challenge that you're trying to address every episode of a given show anyways. I mean, if you think of the 4 characters in Search Party, and if they were all from different Asian cultures per se, it would still be about friends getting roped into solving a mystery they're not really sure is a mystery, and then it gets out of hand, And so I think that in some ways, the way you do it is by letting individuals step into those characters and really dimensionalize them, and really give you an understanding that though this person may be Korean American, that is not all they are. That is not the full extent of their character and their identity. And in the same way that Jin Ha did in Love Life, and Alexander Hodge in Insecure, I think it's about letting these characters step forward and shine and really be themselves, and invite the audience to want to know more about them because of their performance and because of their talent. And the more that opportunities like that can be opened up for actors and performers like that, I think the better sense your average viewer will have of the rich spectrum of cultures that make up the AAPI group. So I think it's about letting talent kind of step into those roles and ingratiate themselves with viewers and fans in the same way that great sitcom characters and dramatic actors have been doing for generations.
So I think this next question might go for Jennifer. So this came from David Maria. So many new Asian writers aren't represented, which means they don't have the opportunity to pitch their stories. What is Hbmx doing to source new stories from new writers? And if so many managers and agents are in the mindset that Asian stories don't sell, how do we help them get discovered? And so I know that WarnerMedia has many writers programs already in place, but maybe talk us through how you approach that. Because, and just to share a little bit, I think in some of our earlier conversations, I really admired the work that all of you were doing to elevate, not just from a marketing side on our agencies, but also, writers' rooms, as well as creators that were greener and younger in their careers. So maybe talk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, especially when I was doing more domestic facing shows and comedies, I think for me it was it's hard to get access to a lot of these writers because they don't know how to get into kind of the fortress, and then therefore it's kind of a catch-22. Then you're like, well, where are the agents that are supposed to send me this, this material? So you kind of have to go out and just expand your horizon and hope that, you have avenues in which you can find some of that content that necessarily isn't easily just kind of thrown into your lap. So I think it's on us as executives to really kind of tap into the programs, tap into these, opportunities, where a lot of things that do come to me is also referral, right? Like through friends or friends. that you're like looking at, or also within executives too, like, hey, Billy, take a look at this, or Billy's like, sending me stuff. So it's a shared passion of wanting to we all have the same greater goal of trying to expand it. But I do think we have to do better. I think that that's something that we need to work on and figure out a better system, because, programs take you only so far, right? And trying to get into those programs too is always a challenge. But I do think it really rests on us to try to find better avenues in which we can kind of get access to these writers.
And I'll say too, I mean, I've been heartened to see agents and managers and representatives who, have a similar mindset that we do, and want to see greater representation and want these stories to be told, and these writers and performers to have a bigger platform than they have historically. And so I do believe that there's positive change in the representation community on that front too, that things are moving in the right direction. But it is about working together and trying to help find and nurture those voices so that they can continue to grow and be the next generation of showrunners and creators.
And if we do find, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But just that, and if we do find someone great, like, I know I keep speaking for Billy, but like, I know we both would agree, like, hey, here's a manager that I think you could, send the material and help funnel like that opportunity and create that path of, like, if you feel like this person is talented, offering a pathway directly to the people that we talk to every day, right? Because maybe they just don't have that access. So if it's just, again, working together and figuring out different outlets to get the, to kind of land where we all want the right, to land for the writer.
Okay, I'm going to try to like rapid fire a handful of questions into this. So this one came from Marie Kier. How do you balance creating an intersectional character that is not defined by only their Asian American identity, but still uniquely Asian American and doesn't feel whitewashed? And I think that this is something very real and, comes up a lot in, social. Andrea has seen it before. How do we think about that?
I think it's challenging, but I think, it comes down to needing to really be thoughtful about the way you write and create this character and give them surprising flaws, surprising strengths, to buck the stereotype or the convention wherever you can. I mean, these are things I think that are important to do for almost any character if you want to make them interesting and stand out. But it's challenging, and it's hard to know how hard you need to hit all of that in the first episode of a show versus you're getting to know someone over the course of a season or a series. Sometimes because like a half-hour pilot, for instance, is pretty short, there will be things that you can't put in the first episode that I've had creators kind of pound the table and say, this is a really critical, essential detail about this character. And it might seem like a small thing, but to me, it's not a small thing. And I think those are the kinds of conversations you want to be having with creators. You want them to be passionate about who these characters are and how they are being introduced to an audience, how fans are getting to know them, and what their flaws are as a character. But it's something that we're constantly juggling. And I think the most straightforward sort of fundamental thing that you can do to help ensure that a character doesn't feel like they're being whitewashed, but also like they're not solely defined by their ethnicity, is to make sure that the person writing them, looks and feels like them, and or at a minimum, like you have people in that writer's room who understand that too. But as Jen was saying earlier, it's a real process making sure that all the people in your writer's room feel empowered, feel like their voice is being heard, feel like they have agency to speak to the characters whose experiences are most like their own. That's all part of the balancing act of developing and producing a show. And no two shows are alike, so it's a task we take very seriously, and that there's no one direct way to fix it or to make sure that problem doesn't exist. But it's about holding, I think, writers to a very high standard in terms of who is this character, what makes them memorable, and does it feel authentic? Will it feel authentic to people who see themselves in this character?
Right. And so I want to turn our attention just to one of these questions that came in that I really liked. And I want to start with Pia and Andrea on this one. But everyone here is in a leadership role. How do you advise younger employees in more junior roles to speak their minds to managers and leaders about diversity on their own teams? And how can junior employees advocate to showcase and involve more representation in their work, from content marketing to PR, and to make sure that their managers share the same mindset? And so I might throw this one to Andrea first, because we recently just had programming around this, but I think this is something very, very squarely, like Pia and Andrea, the both of you should speak to this.
Yeah, so I would say if it's something that you truly believe in and are passionate about, you should lean into it and embrace it. I know it's hard sometimes, like when you're more on the junior side, but I think, like Katie, something that you said to me, like even just in my time here, was just, if not you, then who? And I think that for me was such a wake up of just like, I'm actually in a position where I can have these conversations, really champion these things too. But a lot of it actually does come from my team too. So the fact that like they felt comfortable bringing these things to me, letting me know that like, hey, like either these are opportunities or there's problems with some of the things that we're addressing, or in terms of our approach. That's really just like, it starts in the workplace, right? And like, even we have an opportunity too of like, it's a microcosm too of like what's going on in the environment, as well as like larger community in the world as a whole too. So you have to start somewhere, but I know it's hard, and you just have to be brave is like the main thing that like I would want to leave people with.
Plus 1,000. I think that it does take courage, particularly when it's the first time. But find an ally, right? There are allies all around, and I guarantee that if you feel like, oh, I feel awkward bringing that up, at least I know it's happened for me, and I've been in that position years ago, and I've had to do that too. Certainly do it one-on-one, so you're not blowing up anyone's spot. But and instead of positioning it as calling them out, call them in, right? This is about all of us educating each other, and giving people space to learn and to make mistakes, and say like, this is, no one knows, there's no playbook for this. And so but agree with Andrea, I think it takes some courage, but if you can find an ally and do it, I think that you will pave the way for many, many more people.
So in the final minute, and this will be a rapid fire question, in a word or a line, maybe share one piece of advice for anyone watching this who is struggling or is experiencing the world around them and is just seeking advice on how to overcome that. Or it could actually be encouraging, people to join the entertainment industry in this way, and like giving them the courage to pursue the things that each of you have. So I'm going to kick this off, and I'm going to start with Jeniffer.
Okay. Oh gosh, advice. I would just say, I know this sounds so, gosh, because it's something I tell myself every day, is just like, believe in yourself. I think growing up, especially, growing up Asian American, there's this sense of like, I'm not sure, second guessing, staying quiet. And it's so ingrained in me. And so now more and more, I think just in light of what's been happening, I just feel more empowered to speak up and to also just believe in myself. So I really think that, it's especially if you want to try to get into the business too, it's like, it's hard, but it's not impossible. Anyone can do it. And if you believe in it and you can find, the right access points to get in, just do it. So that has been something in my everyday, my mantra is just like, believe in yourself. So I hope that everyone could say that to themselves too.
Andrea?
I would say like Pia's point about like finding your allies, like that's something that is like so important, and really embracing that and leaning into it in terms of ways that like you can also just build a coalition, right? It starts somewhere. And like being a part of that is something that is just so valuable at every single level and every single industry.
Billy?
I always tell people who are interested in breaking into entertainment, no matter what it is that they want to do, to be a student of the game and a fan, essentially, and to, if comic books are the thing that got you interested in it, read them voraciously. If you've always been a movie fan, go every weekend, even when there doesn't seem to be something great in the theaters that you really want to see. But study it as much as you can, and study the things you love, and really, I wouldn't say follow your bliss necessarily, like that's your advice, but as a fan, as a student of the game, learn as much as you can about those things. I was a huge comic book fan as a kid growing up, and to now sometimes be on meetings or even emails with Jim Lee, who drew some of these iconic X-Men comics that I grew up reading, to be on the same Zoom with him once with like 30 other people even, but was a real dream come true, pinch yourself kind of moment. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't, read tons and tons and tons, probably an unhealthy amount of those comics way back when, I mean, those things oddly do become the foundation of your career in entertainment. So I think be a student of the game, be a fan, and like Jen said, believe in yourself. You absolutely have to. No one else is going to if you don't. And it's a big world out there. There's room for a lot of different kinds of storytellers and creatives.
I love that. Also, huge fan of Jim. So Pia, bring us home.
Same. I fangirl every time I email Jim. So yes. And I would say your uniqueness is your superpower. You definitely have something to say. And I think that, that's something that I always encourage my team to just show up authentically yourself, because like every single person on the team is there for a very distinct reason. And so speak your mind, speak your truth.
I love it. That is a perfect way to end our panel. I want to thank everyone who joined. I am very honored to work with this group. I hope all of you have learned and taken away something from this. So thank you. Thank you for your time and sharing your stories. And with that, I want to hand it back to Charlie.
Katie, thanks so much. And thanks to you, Billy, Jennifer, Andrea, and Pia for an insightful and in-depth conversation about AAPI representation in the industry. We look forward to continuing this important conversation. We'd also like to point out our next program that will be coming up, which will be BTS and Beyond, and exploring in conversation with our Korea Center, the phenomenon and amazement that is BTS, which will be featuring 4 very insightful and incredible speakers for that. And that will be on April 20th at 6 to 7 p.m. Los Angeles time. Hope you'll join us for that. We also hope that you'll consider becoming a member or making a donation to Asia Society Southern California. We make all of these programs available for free, and I hope you'll support us so we can continue to do this kind of incredible program. So on that note, thank you, everyone, and good night.